do today in resumes and answering some of your commonly asked questions. So feel free to drop those in the chat, say hello, tell me what things you are seeing clients struggle with and how we can address those. And I'm going to go through a few of the ones that I usually hear with some samples and examples that you can take away. So we're here always talking about the now, the new, and the next in careers. And really, it's interesting to see what has changed and kind of evolved in resumes in the last few years and what we might need to be aware of. So we'll talk a little bit about those trends before we dive into some of the Q&A and examples. Please feel free to use the chat, say hello, tell us what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what questions you see clients coming to you with, and I can answer those. Sometimes I don't see questions from all of the different areas, so if I miss your question today, we'll come back and answer it next week as we go through things as well. So welcome, good to see you all. Today we're going to go through some trends in resume writing. Love to hear what you all are seeing and then answer some of those commonly asked questions. And I've got some samples prepared that I can show you to answer those questions, as well as always pretty quick to find something that can answer a question if I don't have it ready. So, trends. One of the things that we're seeing with resumes today is really a decrease in design. So I don't know, maybe 2-3 years ago, there was a push towards more design. We were creating Canva headers and doing some of those things. And some of us still are, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. We are seeing a little bit slim down of that design, more crisp, clean. Ease of reading is paramount, right? The fanciness cannot get in the way of, can I find what I'm looking for quickly as a recruiter? And those things are the bread and butter. Can I find out where you worked, what were your titles, what the years were, and what you actually did or accomplished, achieved, the value that you brought? That helps me see that you're qualified. Of course, I have to see that you're qualified. That's the baseline, but then I want to see above that as well. So if we're using formatting that gets in the way of being able to quickly see that someone is qualified, that's going to cause problems. And I know we got a little in love with the 2-column resume format a few years ago. Ironically, just as resumes, we're moving into 2 columns, websites, we're moving away from 2 columns. So it's not that surprising that it was a short-lived thing, because it was never great for the neuroscience of reading and for readability, because you've probably heard me say this, the eye picks one column to read from top to bottom, left to right, because that's the way we read, and then may get to the other column or not. So depending on the type of client you're working with and what's really important to get across, you might be cutting the content in half that reader is going to consume when you create those 2-column resumes. So it's not that you can't do it. It has nothing to do with applicant tracking systems. I can create you a 2-column resume that would go through an applicant tracking system, but it's simply that it is very hard for the eye to read. And of course, it's harder for those systems to parse as well. So simple, usually 1 column, 2 pages is perfectly fine. We've been fighting that myth for more than a decade. Unless you're working with a recent grad, new person, or someone who's targeting an entry-level role, 2-page resume is absolutely fine and easy to read, nice white space. Use the neuroscience of design in your favor. I've got a whole session on that. I'll drop the link in here for you. But there are some specific things that do help readers, like border lines, effective use of the F pattern in reading, those types of things. So clean it up, make it crisp. You could still use your fancy Canva pretty header if you want to. You just want to make sure that it's easy for the reader to find what they want to find, and that any visuals, which visuals are fine in a resume, they don't hurt tracking systems most of the time. The visual itself won't be read, which is why we need to make sure the rest of the content is in Word, right, on the document. But if you do use a visual, it has to matter, because it is going to steal the show. It's going to take the eyes first, the research shows us that if there is a visual, the eye will look at it first. It's great. We gain a lot of information quickly from visuals, but if it isn't important, now you're just wasting your reader's time on a visual that doesn't add value. So be careful of that. Other thing that we're seeing in resumes is a lot of people talking about how do you talk about soft skills in a resume? And this is where we get to that challenge of, yes, the soft skills do matter. However, they're the icing, not the cake. So we have to show that the person is qualified in the hard skills, the experience that the person is looking for, and then we use the soft skills to differentiate that client. But it only works if we put them in context. If we have them in a value-based statement that kind of says, so what? So you're a great communicator, so what? And prove it, because anybody can say excellent communication skills on their resume, doesn't mean they actually have them. So we've got to show it in context and be able to have that. Now, when we do that and we think about how does this look, this is part of what's changed quite a bit, is the look of that summary section is really getting shorter, tighter, and more specific. And many of you saw the visual. That's why you're here, where I said if your summary from your resume or your LinkedIn profile can be copied and pasted and put on someone else's, it's wasting space. We need specifics in there. We really need to get clear on what matters so that it speaks to our client, not to any client, and gets rid of some of those overused fluffy phrases. Okay. So what are some of the questions and challenges that I get the most? And I'd love to see your questions and challenges. Feel free to put them in the chat. And if I don't see them, hopefully I can get them later. With the increasing of ATS, what advice do you give in preparing applications? This is going to sound trite, but it's really show you are qualified. Formatting, all of that really doesn't matter. You have to show that you're qualified. It's very rare that you're getting kicked out of those systems because of your formatting. And that's the thing everybody wants to focus on. And honestly, it just decreases the focus where it needs to be, which is, are you addressing the qualifications that the job is asking for as specifically and clearly with their language, with actual proof points? Because the systems are getting smarter to not just look for keyword matches, but to look for those words in context. And of course, the individuals who are looking at them, and almost every company will tell you that the resumes get looked at by a human, not just the system. So the human is looking for the qualifications. Most of the time when people are having a hard time getting through those systems, it's because they're not showing that they're qualified on their document. They're just not. They're not thinking about it. I just got a resume from someone who's struggling, and it's 10 pages long, has everything in the kitchen sink on it. So yes, it might get through an applicant tracking system, although because it's got everything, it really has nothing. But if you're not speaking specifically to the keywords that are in the job description, to the requirements that are asking for it, yeah, I mean, in some ways, Karen, yes, it's impossible to create an ATS friendly resume, but in another way, it's not that hard because the systems are not kicking you out that easily. That's a myth. They're not kicking you out. They're not doing that. If you use certain things, you might score low in the systems that use scoring. Like a PDF can score a 0 in some systems, but very few people are going to have that actually automatic reject you because they know it's an error. The human is going to go look at it. Text boxes are the other thing that wouldn't get read by a scoring system. So if your whole resume is text boxes, that might be a problem. But in general, you create a Microsoft Word document, you use the page to write your content, and you put in the words that are on the job description. That's as much as we can do. And that's where I find most people aren't putting enough focus is, do you have not just the words from the job description, but have you really thought about what they're looking for, what problems they want you to solve? And you're mixing those words in with the actual context of what the company is looking for. And this is a great use of ChatGPT or other systems to do the research, to boil down job descriptions, to analyze job descriptions, and really understand What is this company looking for? What are the top keywords? I like to do it both ways, still the old school way where you get the job description, you read through it, you find the words. Then you can actually ask ChatGPT, put in 2 or 3 job descriptions and ask it, what are the main buckets of qualifications? What are the top keywords? And you've got to make sure that you have those in your resume. Again, it sounds overly simplified, but that's what I see 90% of the time when people are struggling, is that they haven't done that basic work of figuring out what the jobs are actually asking for and making sure their resume includes those words as well as the general context of what are they looking for and am I speaking to that, especially with my context. So a keyword section isn't as common as it used to be. We're seeing those start to go away. Why? Because the keywords have to be in context, both for the human reader and the system, to give it credibility. So I can have a keyword list, but most recruiters, some like it and they kind of see it as a checklist, but then they've also got to see it down in the experience section. Are you actually demonstrating that you've used it? So we're starting to see less of those, especially on the higher level resumes where they were kind of a given anyways. We're seeing less of those, but you just want to think about, sure, you could have that keyword list, keep it condensed. I don't want to see more than 12. I think 12 is the very highest. I try to stick to 9, right? 3 rows of 3. That's already getting to kitchen sink territory. When you've got everything listed in your skills section, 1, you're taking away from the space to actually give me some content that I care about. And 2, you just are getting too widespread in terms of trying to say you can do everything, or you're including skills that might not be at the right level. Something Adrian, Tom and I are going to be discussing during our session on Thursday is at that executive level, really making sure you're at the right level with those lists and not putting things on there that make your person look more junior than they're supposed to be, or whatever it might be. So the lists are still there, but we're just being really thoughtful about the strategy, making sure it's tight. We're not listing everything, and it has to be demonstrated in the content. It can't just be in the keyword list. So if you've got something you want to put in the keyword list, you've got to make sure it's in a bullet point down below in the experience section. Okay, let's look at a few challenges that I see people facing, and feel free to keep asking your questions there. So one of the things that I see people struggling with a little bit is when they've got a gap. And so this is one of the things we've been working on. Well, we've been teaching this forever. I did see people saying, oh, gap isn't as big of a deal during COVID. And surprise, surprise, now that we're moving out of COVID, gaps are back to being a big deal. Do I wish they weren't? Yes, but I live in the reality land. So let's just talk about how we address the gap. The first thing is to not have the gap look like a gap. Can we fill it with consulting, volunteer work, something that is in line with what the person has been doing? Be very careful of filling with fluff. We had someone talking about, they had someone out of work for 10 years raising kids. If you are going to put kid raising type activities in there, they have to be aligned with the person's goal. Otherwise, they're just fluff and they're actually taking the focus away from the older experience that is more relevant. We don't want to do that. So we always have to have the focus first, so then we can make decisions based on what we include. And my top tip when you've got someone with a gap is don't start with the gap. Start with, what are you aiming for? What is the goal? What are they looking for? Audience research first, and do that first. Then say, what do you have that shows you're qualified? Let's get all that good stuff in, and then say, okay, if we haven't gotten anything yet from this gap period, what during the gap would add value to the conversation we've just been having about what are the qualifications? What do you have that shows you're qualified from any time during your background? What are the strongest stuff? And then what are we going to do with the gap? And if I've got a lot of strong stuff, work experience, other things, I'm going to try to minimize the space the gap takes on the page so that the page is full with that qualifying experience, not a bunch of stuff about other activities just to fill the space. We don't want to do that. So don't get overly clever. There's some recent research on the impacts of motherhood bias. We like to think that that went away, but it didn't. So be careful with over focusing on parenting because it will cost your female clients money. Straightforward, real world talk, it will cost your female clients money if you over focus on motherhood. So be careful about that when you're filling a gap. Now, sometimes that's all you got. So we'll come back to the student one here. But this is one of my examples that I put together for a mother who is returning to the workforce after a long time out of the workforce. And she had a big gap, 15 years. And so she wanted to come back at first. She said she wanted to do engineering. And I said, well, tell me about what you've been doing most recently. And she started talking about the experiences that she'd had with her volunteer experience. So Boy Scouts of America, she was a scouting director, right? We don't see mother, we don't see club mom, we don't see pack mom. We create a job title that fits with the types of job titles she could target. She was a coordinator. She was, doing leadership things. And so we've got some content there. Then we've got the PTA kind of stuff. But again, we talk about it as in terms of a job because it's relevant to the types of jobs she decided to target, or more in the volunteer or nonprofit coordinator type roles which fit with what she had been doing. So we're looking at how can we get information that aligns with the goal and fill the resume with that. And if we've got someone that's been doing work that isn't related to their job goal, we wouldn't be able to fill it like that. You would put in the work experience that they do have, or the number 2 way to fill the gap, which is a class. Now you can go find a free class on anything under the sun right now at a great institution. And most of the time they give you a project to do. So you could do a new digital marketing project with this class and be able to put that on your resume. Or go find a nonprofit or something who needs marketing help, if that's your focus, and go and help and get that marketing piece on your resume. I think that's especially important for some fields that have changed a lot, like marketing. Excellent. De-age resumes. Yes. So this is a challenge because we don't want to create too much of a gap. So I'd see a lot of people say, only put 10 years on your resume. Well, if you're 60 and you put 10 years on your resume, then you look like 5. When you come in an interview and you're 60, there's just this weirdness, like where did the other 20 years go? So we've got to be a little bit careful of finding a happy medium of not putting every single date on the resume, but not perhaps just cutting it off at 10 years and have nothing before that, especially if the person is showing some kind of advancement. We need to see some of that previous work history. So a few things that I recommend is, one, typically not putting any dates on education. We don't need that. It violates HIPAA. There's all kinds of reasons we can get away with not putting dates on a educational experience. Then, do we need the dates on their older work experience? So oftentimes we'll put 10 to 15 years with the dates, chronological work history, and then have a early work experience section that summarizes some of that older experience, maybe shows titles, maybe some companies, depending on the relevance of those information, and no dates. That way you can say, hey, I'm showing you 15 years, but I'm not 40, so that when I come in and I'm 60, there's not as much of that kind of weirdness feel. So no dates on education. You might go 15 to 20 years back with dates on the resume, and then have that early education section. And actually, Adrian's going to be going through some examples of that during our session next week. All right. And then let's see here. Do you have any saving resumes on LinkedIn? I wouldn't recommend attaching your resume as like a document in your featured section or anything. I wouldn't recommend that. Why? 2 reasons. 1, security. Well, 3. 1, security reasons. Really don't need everybody on LinkedIn to have access to your resume. 2, you can't target it then. So it's going to be generic. we don't want everybody to be able to see the same resume. You want to be able to target that and apply where you apply. And then 3 is you kind of want that interaction with a recruiter. If they're looking at your LinkedIn profile, which should have all of the good information on it already, but just in the voice of LinkedIn and in the anonymous, you may not put dollar figures on LinkedIn, some of those things. So you're writing a LinkedIn profile for LinkedIn. First person, accessible, conversational tone, being thoughtful about how you phrase numbers and things that may be private. But then that recruiter will hopefully reach out to you and ask for your resume, and that starts that conversation. If they can just download your resume off of LinkedIn, then 1, they're getting, again, that resume that's not necessarily targeted to them, and 2, you don't get that interaction. So I would be careful about that. I don't recommend, and other people might disagree. Feel free to share in the chat, but I wouldn't recommend that for your LinkedIn profile. Okay, so the other thing that I hear a lot of people talk about, let me just jump over and see if we've got other questions on LinkedIn here. Excellent. Ooh, okay. Yeah, we talked about aging, we talked about applicant tracking systems. Excellent. Okay, so then the other thing that oftentimes we have people say is that you've got information that is related to school, and how do you address that on your resume? And this example that I have up here, I was trying to see if the education one. I like to use education in a resume in a way that looks like a job. So if you've got an education section, you can put in information. This one that I have here, and I'll pull this up. A lot of times you've also got students that are doing things outside of school. And so this one just gives an idea of how you could walk that line. So this was a student that was going for information security, network administration. I know some of these things are a little old because the sample is a little older, but then you get into the computer education and expertise. So what we've done here is, instead of just listing classes, which we essentially did kind of up here in this section anyways, instead of listing classes, we've got what the person actually did. So I love that education for at least the last, 5 to 7 years has been project heavy, because what that does is it gives us an opportunity to write those projects as bullet points in a resume. So instead of making the person just look like, a student and having a list of classes and not having much content, I can put their school projects in here. Now, this person was also doing some kind of at home on the side types of things. And so those are all mixed in here with the class projects plus the things they were doing out of their own interest at home. So we can do that. We can turn classes into projects. We can turn volunteer things into jobs. There's a lot of opportunity, as long as it's relevant, to really pull out and share those experiences like we would for someone who was employed. So don't count your students short just because they were students. Help them get those experiences out, tell them like their jobs, and really communicate what they have done. And then, of course, we've got a little bit of the professional experience at the bottom. It's not related, but it shows that the person can hold a job, which is what we're looking for. So when you've got an older worker who goes back to school and you want to put that education on there, you're thinking about how could you bring in those experiences, or you've got the person that is just graduated, and how could you put in those experiences? That's what we're looking for. So I think I might have just spoke to that, Karen, that projects, it depends on how they were created, but I will use projects that weren't necessarily as part of a job when they're relevant and figure out a way to do it. So I was working with someone who'd been in, a corporate job, but they wanted to move into working at Home Depot, kind of their retirement job. So we said carpentry skills and experience. and then put the work that they'd done at home, the specific things they designed and created, the specifics. And it wasn't related to a job. There wasn't a date, there wasn't an employer, but it was in that section of carpentry skills and experience. Now they had, 30-year work history with a company in a totally different job. So there wasn't that, can they hold a job? But it's more, what is their experience that would make me want to hire them and have them, helping people in my store. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, people are agreeing not to have your resume. You want it to be separate. You don't want it to be a duplicate. Yeah, excellent. So then the last thing that I'll speak to, and when we do our session on Thursday with, we're doing a session on Thursday with Adrian Tom, just really looking at what do we need to do to make resumes at this executive level, and especially speak to the executive level skills that people are looking for. So leadership narratives, you can actually go to rwa.training/leadership narratives as well. But this is our other link. And what we're going to be looking at a little bit is this summary section. So I've got an example that isn't quite at the executive level, but it is helpful to think about what has changed in summaries and how do we want to adjust that. So I've heard some people say that summaries are just completely going away. I don't know that that's necessary, but it is necessary that they stop being generic junk. Again, if you could copy and paste it from someone to someone else, it's not going to work. So this is what I see a lot, demonstrated success, strength in ability to, just these weak phrases that don't have any specifics. So even at a kind of first level improvement, we can talk about what the person has actually done. Maximize productivity and collaboration. Even better if we could get more specific, but achieve cost savings, cost avoidance, deliver positive outcomes, optimize management of 38 million in assets. You can see that the more specific you get, the more punch this has. So what we're doing is we're summarizing, but we're summarizing by kind of having that value impact statement, not just the fluffy who am I. The who am I has to be demonstrated by the specifics, not shared in generics. So this other one, high performance, results oriented sales leader. Claire Davis and I were talking about this on yesterday on my Career Confidant show. Right, that's just generic junk. But when you can say, even if you don't have numbers, identifying and delivering solutions, profits to record levels, turned around sales and customer satisfaction, repeatedly building multi-million-dollar portfolios. So you're highlighting the wins and specifics instead of just the generics. Now, of course, what we're seeing lots of summaries move to is having a few of those key bullet points that really hit home the overall wins that our clients have produced. And not everybody has sales wins, but everybody does have value impact that they've made. Our job, of course, as resume writers is to help them uncover that and then communicate it in a way that communicates the value, the specifics, and the value. So that's what we're aiming for, is to be able to speak to specifics, true stories, get the real language. This is why we can't just ask ChatGPT to write us a resume. And I've seen that prompt going around. It's getting hundreds of likes and you cannot go into ChatGPT and just say, write me a resume. It's not going to work. It can't tell your specifics. It doesn't have your stories. So you can get sample bullet points. You can get some ideas of what types of stories you could tell, and you can use those in some ways. But we've got to be really careful, because if all we've got are those generics or things that are claims that we really can't back up, we're going to be in some hot water pretty quickly. So please be careful of that as you move forward with writing your clients' resumes. Help them get their own stories, their own specifics out there throughout the resume and in the summary, so that they really have a position of power, not just keywords. And, we can get so stuck on that. Yes, those need to be in there, but I want to see that resume just jump off the page in terms of being crystal clear, the problems you can solve, the value you can bring, and an understanding of how that fits into what the hiring manager is really looking for. And applicant tracking systems are not the big bully, right? They are not they should not be taking up as much of a brain space as we let them. We should be focused on, how do we show my client is qualified? How do we show that they've solved those problems in the past that the employer is looking to solve now? And when we do that, the rest of it will come. It will be an easy fix to make sure that we've got the right words and kind of that nuance when we've got the right focus to begin with, because we did our research, we understand what the employer is really looking for, what keeps them up at night, all of those things, and we really write our stories to show them that we can solve those problems. That's our goal, and the keywords will come. All right. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next week. We're going to start talking, we'll probably talk a little bit more about resumes, and then we'll start moving into some other topics for the year. Please let me know if there's other questions you have or other topics you'd like us to talk about. And we'll be back next Tuesday for the Now, the New, and the Next in Careers. Thank you, everyone.